Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 7 tight end rankings for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're talking about all things related to the tight end position, starting off with matchups. We'll talk about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing tight ends thus far this season in a half PPR scoring format. Then after that, we'll talk about my top 16 tight end rankings for a half PPR scoring format. For those of you who are looking for specific players, you can go down into the description of the video and find my timestamps down there. While you're down there, if you have not yet already, click that subscribe button, join the community. We've just recently hit 31,000. We're on our next way to 32K. So again, we're going to be making 2020 fantasy football content here on the daily for the entirety of the season. After this video, a little bit later today, the quarterback rankings video will be released tomorrow. Hidden Gems, Sunday morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Kickoff with Kirchhoff. We're setting lineups, doing an adjusted ranking, updated rankings, all that kind of stuff, answering questions before kickoff. Outside of that, make sure you click the like button down below. It really does help me out a lot. Let's try to get past 1,000 likes. I really do appreciate you guys doing that for me. And make sure you leave a comment down below. I'm ready to talk about some tight ends. Let's talk about matchups at the tight end position going into Week 7 of the 2020 fantasy football season. Starting off with the teams that are giving up the most points. The New Orleans Saints, coming off the bye week, of course. They've given up a lot of points to opposing tight ends, but of course, the Carolina Panthers do not have a tight end on roster that is going to be able to take advantage of it. But now that we've mentioned, the New Orleans Saints coming off of the bye, we have to remind everybody that the teams, the Minnesota Vikings, the Indianapolis Colts, the Miami Dolphins, and the Baltimore Ravens are all on bye week this week. So none of those players will be involved in today's video. But regardless, the New Orleans Saints have given up a lot of points to the tight end position. Nearly, 73 yards and a touchdown per game on average is a ridiculous amount. Regardless, we move on to the Atlanta Falcons playing against TJ Hockenson. Could have himself a pretty good matchup there. The Buffalo Bills, unfortunately, take on the New York Jets. So Chris Herndon, I'm not thinking he's stepping up anytime soon. Later today, we have the Thursday night football game between the Philadelphia Eagles and the New York Giants. Evan Engram, it's only a matter of time until he potentially has a breakout game here. It's kind of trending in the right direction, in my opinion. So hopefully we can get him in the right position to at least succeed in the coming weeks. Potentially the Philadelphia game tonight can be that game for him. The Washington football team, of course, giving up a lot of points. They play against the Dallas Cowboys. Maybe Dalton Schultz, maybe Andy Dalton to Dalton Schultz, a Dalton to Dalton kind of reception goes down in the red zone. That would be nice to see, especially considering how many points Washington's given up to opposing tight ends. Cincinnati, of course, Austin Hooper has gotten a lot of targets. If I'm not mistaken, it's 23 targets in the last 3 weeks. And David Njoku's made some noise about potentially wanting to be traded out of the Cleveland organization. So that only helps Austin Hooper's potential going forward. The Jacksonville Jaguars, Tennessee Titans, Los Angeles Chargers, and Cleveland Browns round out the top 10 in terms of giving up the most points to opposing tight ends. Now we move on into talking about some of the tougher matchups. Of course, the Indianapolis Colts, they have a bye week, but the Detroit Lions take on Hayden Hurst. Sure, Hayden Hurst had one good week. His inconsistency is just not enough for me to buy into it. We'll talk about that a little bit later on today's episode. The Miami Dolphins on a bye week. The Seattle Seahawks haven't given up much points, but again, the Cardinals don't have a tight end on roster that's going to be able to take advantage of it regardless. The New England Patriots always shutting down tight ends. We'll talk about George Kittle and his potential this upcoming week. And then, of course, the New York Giants. They are a very stout defense in terms of stopping opposing tight ends and stopping offenses in general this season. They've been a far more improved defense. They brought in a lot of defensive players through free agency in the draft. And it's going to be interesting to see if a third-string tight end like Richard Rodgers later tonight on Thursday Night Football can take advantage of it with his opportunity and the target share that he's going to be in line with Zach Ertz missing and Dallas Goedert still out on IR. So that pretty much covers everything. Hopefully gives you a little bit more perspective on this week's matchups. And we can go ahead and start talking about my top 16 tight end rankings for Week 7 of the 2020 fantasy football season. Starting off with our number one, we have ourselves Travis Kelce. Now, here's the thing about Travis Kelce. Of course, it's no surprise that he's our number one tight end. And as of right now, in fantasy football, half PPR scoring format, he is the number one tight end by 26.8 points ahead of George Kittle. So, of course, George Kittle's missed some time, but in comparison to all these other tight ends in the National Football League, Travis Kelce's got a pretty significant margin ahead of all of them. Obviously, his last week's performance against the Buffalo Bills has made a pretty big difference. He had 19 fantasy points, 2 receiving touchdowns on 7 targets, 5 receptions for 62 total yards. That's a fantastic performance in a game. This upcoming week, they take on the Denver Broncos. Again, the matchup seems juicy to me. The last time he played against the Denver Broncos last year, 13 targets, 11 receptions, 142 receiving yards. That kind of performance is nothing out of the realm of possibility for this upcoming week. Again, Sammy Watkins will be missing this upcoming week. They're going to have a rotation in the backfield. Regardless, the only consistent thing in this offense as of thus far this season has been Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, that 1-2 combo. So I have a lot of confidence in him. And of course, he is my number one. Number two belongs to George Kittle. Now, Of course, George Kittle versus the Rams last week was an automatic. I mean, he's averaging 16 plus fantasy points against the Rams in the last 3 seasons. So it wasn't much of a surprise that the Rams couldn't stop him. Now, playing against Bill Belichick is a completely different conversation. I mention it every single week when we have a tight end in the top 12 or 16 rankings that is going to be playing against the New England Patriots. Belichick is very good at locking down opposing tight ends. He's done it for the last couple of years, and I've rarely seen performances from tight ends just completely pop off. But the fact of the matter is, we're not sitting George Kittle. We just can't do that. George Kittle is a stud for a reason. He had 10 targets, 7 receptions, 109 receiving yards, and a touchdown last week for a reason. And I think regardless of the matchup, even though there's a very good possibility that he gets locked down, I think there's still a chance that George Kittle could be a viable option in this offense. And even though they could probably double cover him or try to force Jimmy Garoppolo away from Kittle, this offense is highly predicated around getting him the ball a consistent amount of times. So I still believe in George Kittle, and I think regardless of the matchup, he's still my number 2. Number 3 is Darren Waller. So he's coming off the bye week. The whole question around the Las Vegas Raiders as of right now is whether or not Trent Brown and the rest of the offensive linemen are even going to play this week. That is something that we'll have to track as the week goes on, going into Sunday morning. But as of right now, Darren Waller has been one of the best tight ends in the National Football League for the last 2 years. This season has been averaging 9.4 targets per game, 6.8 receptions, and 59 receiving yards per game, and has scored a touchdown in 2 of his 5 total contests. As of right now, he's the number 1 receiving option for the Las Vegas Raiders. It's not really a surprise considering the fact there's been so many injuries to guys like Bryan Edwards and Henry Ruggs, who have thought to be the number 1s and were drafted to come in and help be the number 1s for this offense. Of course, Tyrell Williams prior to the season even beginning went to the IR. So they've definitely needed help at the receiver position. They haven't had that. So Darren Waller has had to step up. There's a reason why the Las Vegas Raiders have targeted the tight end position more than any other team in the National Football League thus far this season. They target their tight ends 33.93% of the time. That is an incredible margin. It's number 1 in the National Football League, and as long as Darren Waller's on the field, he is going to always be the number 1 option in this offense. Averaging 9 targets per game, you couldn't ask for anything more from your tight end. That's an incredible opportunity that a lot of guys just don't see in the National Football League. So playing against Tampa Bay, again, sure, they might have good coverage. I'm not really worried about it. Darren Waller's going to be designed plays to get him the ball in open space. He'll be able to deliver. Hunter Henry's our number 4. So here's the thing about Hunter Henry. The Chargers offense has got a pretty good slate of schedule, in a couple of weeks. They're coming along. And I know Keenan Allen's been dealing with a little bit of a back injury. If that is going to limit him this upcoming week, it kind of, leans even more into the favor of Hunter Henry. The reason why I have him at number 4 isn't because of the fact that he's getting more utilization in this offense. He's getting himself 6 to 8 targets per week with Justin Herbert under center. But on top of that, I wanted to also kind of give you guys a little bit of perspective as to what the Jacksonville Jaguars have been allowing to opposing tight ends. Now, the last time Hunter Henry played against the Jacksonville Jaguars was last season, 2019. He had himself 39 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown against them. Those are great numbers. We'll take that any day of the week. But already this season, the Jacksonville Jaguars have given up a total of 5 total receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends in just the last 5 weeks. So again, it looks like Hunter Henry could be in line to having himself a pretty good game here, especially with the fact that he's gaining and building more of a synergy with Justin Herbert. I could see potentially, Hunter Henry continuing to climb in these rankings, getting himself more utilization with Austin Eckler out. There's going to have to be another receiving option outside of that backfield that steps up. I think that's Hunter Henry this week against Jacksonville. I'm very confident in his potential. We go ahead and we move on. Our number 5 is Jonnu Smith. Now, I don't know 100% without a doubt that Jonnu Smith is going to play. Obviously, he left last week's game against the Houston Texans early. Anthony Firkser stepped in, had himself, over 100 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. That is all fantastic. But what I wanted to preface today as my number 5 for Jonnu Smith is that, again, if in fact Jonnu Smith is going to play, I know he's dealing with an ankle injury, something he's re-injured. If he's going to play, he's a guy that I still want to end up throwing out there. I don't even care if he's playing against the Pittsburgh Steelers, because the Tennessee Titans thus far this season have targeted their tight end position 33.33% of the time. That's second to the Las Vegas Raiders. So again, they use their tight end position unlike any other team in the National Football League. And when you play against the Pittsburgh Steelers, it's going to be difficult to run the ball. So I'm expecting them to absolutely throw the ball with Ryan Tannehill to their dynamic receivers of A.J. Brown, Corey Davis, Adam Humphries. But again, Jonnu Smith is a huge part of this offense. He's scored 5 touchdowns already this season. And the fact that Anthony Firkser could just step in and produce 100 receiving yards and a touchdown in an any given week kind of scenario just makes me believe that the tight end position for this team has that much more value, that much more opportunity going forward. So if in fact he's healthy and ready to play, I think he's an absolute must start. By Sunday morning, of course, we kick off with Kirchhoff. We'll get a little bit of a better designation, whether he practices a little bit later today on Thursday and Friday, and then a little bit of a walkthrough on Saturday. So we'll kind of get a better understanding there. Hopefully he's ready to go this week, because I'm sure many of you definitely were hurt by him being in your lineup last week and just really not showing up because of the injury, of course. Moving on, we have ourselves number 6, Jared Cook. Jared Cook coming off of a bye week himself. The reason why I have Jared Cook as high as number 6, because, I mean, the thing is, Jared Cook is pretty much what he was last year. For many of you who remember, Jared Cook last year, I think, only had like 43 receptions, had 9 receiving touchdowns, was one of these tight ends that wasn't playing many of the offensive snap counts. I think he averaged about 40% of the snap counts per week. And honestly was just a tight end with high touchdown upside, considering the offense he was associated with. And the back end of the season, when Drew Brees came back in week 10, was throwing about 3 touchdowns per game. And of course, a guy like Jared Cook was able to benefit from that. But already thus far this season, we've seen Jared Cook have a little bit of a couple glimpses of what he showed last year, of being that guy that can be a touchdown upside play every single week. And when I think about him playing against the Carolina Panthers, the last 2 games that he's played against the Carolina Panthers, both in 2019, he totaled 8 total receptions for 143 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. I know the Carolina Panthers have played better this season in comparison to playing against tight ends, but I still think that this is something that they want to key in on. They keyed on it last year, and they'll once again go back into the well and allow Jared Cook to find himself some value. It kind of looks like Michael Thomas might end up missing this week. They're going to have to spread the ball out even more. It gives more opportunity for a guy like Jared Cook, and that's why I have him as my number 6 this week. I think he's got a pretty good matchup and pretty good opportunity to have himself, of course, a touchdown in a pretty good game. Moving on, we have ourselves TJ Hockenson as my number 7. Now, a couple of the stats that I wanted to just point out. TJ Hockenson is coming off back-to-back performances, one in week 4 and one in week 6, of scoring a receiving touchdown. Now, of course, his targets and his catch numbers aren't the greatest, but he plays against the Atlanta Falcons. Just to kind of give you a little bit more of a background, we kind of looked at this a little bit earlier. The Atlanta Falcons giving up the second most points to opposing tight ends this season. They're allowing 73 yards to opposing tight ends and, on average, 1 receiving touchdown to opposing tight ends per game this season. So when I think about, the potential of TJ Hockenson, he's always got the red zone work locked down because of his potential as a bigger threat in a Darrell Bevell-led offense. Jimmy Graham back in the day with the Seattle Seahawks, Darrell Bevell as their offense coordinator. That's what they got him involved in, and that's what it seems like could be the potential this upcoming week with Matthew Stafford in a shootout. This gets more involvement from TJ Hockenson and can potentially get him more points this upcoming week. I like the matchup. I like his utilization already down in the red zone. If they get him more usage, in the regular offense as they get to the end zone, I potentially could see him getting himself 50 receiving yards on 5 catches and have the touchdown upside. That in itself, pretty exciting, at least upside in my opinion, for him respectively. So again, TJ Hockenson, he's been getting the job done as of late, has had a pretty good average in terms of fantasy points, about 9 to 10 points per week in a half PPR setting. So as long as he stays on point with that, he should be ready to go. Robert Tonyan's my number 8. Now, I know Robert Tonyan's been dealing with an injury, but if in fact he's ready to go, I wanted to mention him here first and foremost because he plays against the Houston Texans. I mean, Houston's been, one of the teams that just can't really stop anybody defensively. Their defensive line, their secondary, anything that you want to talk about defensively, they haven't gotten the job done. And it was a pretty glaring, factor when the Tennessee Titans had over 200 rushing yards, had received 3 receiving touchdowns from A.J. Brown and Adam Humphries combined, and Anthony Firkser, the backup tight end, had over 100 and a touchdown. So it's pretty glaring how bad that defense has performed. And I think with Aaron Rodgers coming back after this little bit of a hesitating setback of a week against Tampa Bay, I think they need to reestablish themselves. They're going to reestablish the running game, of course, but that's always going to lead to the play action work of Robert Tonyan down in the red zone. Let's not forget there was 3 consecutive weeks where Tonyan scored at least 1 receiving touchdown in this offense. That's where he thrives the most. So if in fact he's healthy and ready to go this upcoming weekend, I think the Houston matchup is one that could be very easy. Let's not forget, there's always the potential that he could disappear. A lot of these tight ends are very much so touchdown dependent, but I still think there's a good enough, carved out amount of targets for him potentially this week to get himself decent enough value to be in this top 12 conversation, of course. Our number 9 for this upcoming week is Dalton Schultz. And even though Dalton Schultz hasn't had an incredible week since, week 5 or 4 with Dak Prescott, the question is, what are we going to potentially see from Dalton Schultz going forward? He had 5 targets, 4 receptions for 35 yards the other day against the Arizona Cardinals. And as of right now, he plays against the Washington football team. The Washington football team have given up 5 total receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends thus far this season. So that's a great number to potentially see. We could see an Andy Dalton to Dalton Schultz kind of connection. I did mention it last week. Andy Dalton could end up finding Dalton Schultz as his potential Tyler Eifert going forward down in the red zone. We're just going to have to wait and see. I think, of course, Dalton Schultz is going to be a big part of this offense. He's playing a key amount of offensive snap count, so he's going to be on the field. It's just a matter of whether or not they're going to design plays to get him open and allow him to just really feast on this defense. I'm expecting him to do so, and I think Dalton Schultz could be a great play here at number 9. Number 10, Austin Hooper. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier today, Austin Hooper's gotten a lot of targets as of late. Just this past week, 6 targets, 5 receptions, 52 yards against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But of course, plays against Cincinnati. That is one of the better matchups. Let's not forget Austin Hooper, 23 targets in the last 3 weeks, has had back-to-back games of 50-plus receiving yards. These are all trends that are going in the correct direction for Austin Hooper. And, if we think about what Austin Hooper was prior to the season, in 2018, he finished as the number 6 overall tight end. In 2019, he finished as the number 6 overall tight end. We know what he's capable of. He has a lot of upside. He is a receiving threat first and foremost. And with this offense still dealing with a lot of injuries, Jarvis Landry dealing with a rib injury, Odell Beckham, still coming back from dealing with a sickness that's outside of COVID, and of course Baker Mayfield a little bit beat up. I think they're definitely going to have to rely upon the tight end position. So I think Austin Hooper has my number 10, pretty safe play this upcoming week. Moving on to number 11, we have ourselves Noah Fant, and the reason why I want to bring up Noah Fant, even though he's coming off of 2 weeks of just kind of recuperating from his injury. The fact of the matter is that the Denver Broncos with Pat Shurmur as their offensive coordinator have really started to buy in on this. We are going to heavily utilize the tight end position. And though Noah Fant did not play last week against the New England Patriots, I think that was more of a, you kind of dodged the performance that you didn't have to start him in because, of course, Bill Belichick locks down tight ends. So the thing is, when I look at the target share for tight ends on the Denver Broncos as of right now, they're getting the ball about 27.5% of the time this season. That is an incredible number. You play against the Kansas City Chiefs. You have Drew Lock back. You know how much he wants to use the tight end position. You go back to weeks 1 and 2 of the 2020 season. Noah Fant was a 15-point tight end in both of those weeks, whether it was scoring touchdowns or getting big yardage plays. He is a huge part of this offense. Getting him back, getting this offense more healthy. You bring back Gordon. You get back KJ Hamler. There's going to be a fully ready offense here. Going to be tough for Kansas City to try to just lock everybody down, but I think Noah Fant could be in a pretty good opportunity here to gash him down the middle and have a pretty good performance here in week 7. We have ourselves number 12, Evan Engram. Again, I'm just going to continue to go to the well. I still think that Evan Engram is eventually going to have himself a pretty good performance. I'm hoping that the Philadelphia game, the fact that Philadelphia has allowed 6 receiving touchdowns to tight ends already this season, is on the side of helping Engram. I know his target counts have not been, amazing. 3 targets last week for 2 receptions and 30 yards. Those aren't numbers that I want to see. I want to see better performances, especially in better matchups. When you play against the Washington football team, you're anticipated to at least have a pretty good game from the tight end position. Daniel Jones is going to have to figure it out. I know that there's a potential that Sterling Shepard comes back. I'm just hoping that this offense can end up picking it up and they can get the ball in the direction of Evan Engram. He's such a talented tight end. He's one of these, wide receivers in a tight end's body that can absolutely take over a game. He's just got to be given the opportunity. Hopefully we'll end up seeing that this upcoming week. Darren Fells is my number 13, As of right now, Darren Fells is coming off of a back-to-back performances of scoring a touchdown in this offense. It looks like Jordan Akins is most likely going to miss. He's been dealing with a concussion and an ankle injury for the last couple of weeks, and I'm not sure if he's completely back on track to playing this week. He was, he missed Wednesday's practice yesterday, so it's kind of looking like it could be another Darren Fells week. Let's not forget, he plays against the Green Bay Packers this past week. Rob Gronkowski had himself his best game of the season since coming back out of retirement against Green Bay. 5 catches, 78 yards, and a touchdown. Darren Fells himself against Tennessee this past week, 6 catches, 85 yards, and a touchdown. So he is on this streak. I'm not 100% ready to buy in and put him as a top 12 receiver just yet because I still think that Darren Fells has the inconsistencies of last year. Last year, I think he had 8 receiving touchdowns, something of that nature. He had a lot of receiving touchdowns. and not too many yardage, not too many targets, not a lot of receptions. He's a guy that in spurts will have himself red zone opportunities or a big play down the middle that just ends up going in his direction. But he's not a guy that you can consistently depend upon on a weekly basis. But I think this week, if Akins is out and the matchup, as juicy as it is, could potentially lean in their favor, and Darren Fells could have himself a pretty good performance. Jimmy Graham's my number 14. In terms of opportunity, Jimmy Graham is getting it. I mean, this past week against Carolina, 8 total targets. I'll take that any day of the week for any tight end. 5 receptions, 34 yards. The way I see it, this upcoming week they play against the LA Rams. We just saw Kittle completely destroy them. I know Jimmy Graham isn't a George Kittle. He doesn't have that ability after the catch, but he is a bigger body target that can absolutely, take on one-on-one matchups and, use his size and his frame to, down in the red zone, down in the end zone, make a play or two. So it's just a matter of whether or not they're going to give him the opportunity to do so. The 8 targets kind of gives me the indication that they definitely are looking to get him the ball on a downly basis. Matt Nagy, of course, former offensive coordinator of the Kansas City Chiefs, always wanted to get the ball to Kelce back in the day, right? He's got to do that with Jimmy Graham. He's got to get him more involved. Of course, Cole Kmet, the Notre Dame rookie tight end that they drafted in the first round, stole a touchdown last week. But I think it'll probably go back in the direction of Jimmy Graham going forward. Eric Ebron's my number 15. I have confidence in Eric Ebron. I know his last 2 performances have been subpar. Having 4 targets, 2 receptions, and 9 yards against Cleveland isn't an exciting thing, considering Cleveland just really gives up a lot of points to opposing tight ends. That being said, I still think that the Tennessee matchup is fantastic. With Darren Fells, who we just mentioned a little bit earlier, going for 6 catches, 85 yards, and a touchdown against Tennessee, it gives me a little bit more confidence for Eric Ebron. But that being said, I'm not 100% ready to just, put down the hammer and say he's 100% a play this week. He's kind of given up 2 pretty good matchups and not had great games. Playing against Cleveland and playing against Philadelphia, those are automatic plays for typical tight ends this year. But to be honest, the fact that he hasn't been able to step up to the plate kind of leads me to believe that maybe he's not in a advantageous position in this offense just yet to get him over the hump with the utilization of course, James Conner out of the backfield and the wide variety of wide receivers they have with Juju Smith-Schuster, Claypool, Deontay Johnson, and James Washington. Maybe Eric Ebron just falls out of the rotation at times and just isn't able to step up. But as of right now, I have a little bit of hope that he can get it done. Last tight end on today's list is number 16, Richard Rodgers. And we've mentioned this before. The Eagles love to use 2 tight end sets. Now, with Zach Ertz out for 4 to 6 weeks, Dallas Goedert still on the injured reserve, it looks like the Eagles are going to have to feed the ball to Richard Rodgers. They're feeding their tight ends the ball and targeting them 32.6% of the time this season. So the fact that Richard Rodgers came into the game in the 3rd and 4th quarter, got himself 3 targets, 3 receptions, 31 yards, could end up being a number 1 receiving target for this offense in this game. Now, we've seen Richard Rodgers in the past with the Green Bay Packers be their number 1 receiving target, but unless this guy's getting an incredible amount of targets or touchdown upside, he sits at number 16. I like his association with the offense and what they're capable of doing. That in itself kind of gives me a little bit more hope in his potential, and that's why he sits at number 16. Now, I wanted to also mention, if in fact we end up seeing Jonnu Smith miss the game and or Robert Tonyan miss the game, we can go ahead and we can switch out Richard Rodgers and move him down. Of course, pull a player out, move everybody down 1 slot, and move Rob Gronkowski into the 16th spot. Even though he had a great game, I don't really think that they need him to beat the Las Vegas Raiders this week. If he gets more utilization, that's fantastic. But again, he's not someone that I'm going to 100% rely upon every single week. He's got to prove it more and more to me every single week with his target counts, his opportunity, his snap counts. And then in that case, I can go ahead and believe that he on a weekly basis can be relied upon. But otherwise, these are our top 16 tight ends for week 7 of the 2020 fantasy football season. Thank you everybody for watching. I really do appreciate it. Later this afternoon, quarterback rankings, top 16. Make sure you check that out. Thursday Night Football. I expect the Eagles to win. I expect them to cover. I think it's -4.5. I expect them to win by a significant margin. We'll see how that goes. But thank you everybody for watching again. Tomorrow, Hidden Gems. Until then, I'll see you guys. Peace.